Okay, it's all good.
Thanks, John.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the January 26th River Falls City Council meeting. First thing we'll do is say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Christy, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Bierstead.
Here.
Downing.
Here.
Gagne.
Here.
Morissette.
Here.
Odine.
Here.
Plunkett.
Here.
Watson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Okay, next we have approval of minutes from the January 12th regular meeting.
I move approval. Second.
Okay, we've got a first and a second on the meeting minutes. Any comments or questions? Okay, Christy, we have first and second on approval of the minutes from the January 12th regular meeting.
First by Morissette, second by Downing. We'll start the vote with Mr. Plunkett. Odine.
Aye.
Watson.
Aye.
Gagne.
Aye.
Morissette.
Aye.
Downing.
Aye.
Bierstead.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, next move on to approval of the bills with Mr. Watson.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I move for the approval of the bills in the amount of $4,909,912.36, subject to the comptroller.
Second.
Any questions or comments on the bills? Christy, we have first and second on the approval of the bills.
First by Watson and second by Bierstead. We'll start the vote with Ms. Odine.
Aye.
Downing.
Aye.
Morissette.
Aye.
Gagne.
Aye.
Watson.
Aye.
Bierstead.
Aye.
Plunkett. Thank you.
Okay, next move on to public comments. John, is there anybody at the City Hall?
I have a couple people online that asked to speak, so I'm going to bring them in.
Okay, thank you.
And, oops. Gordon Awesome, and Terry Renslow.
Okay.
Let's see. Should. Gordon.
You're with me. We're on the same computer.
Hello. There we are. Gordon.
Hello. I don't know if you can see me, but I can hear you.
Give it a shot again.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Wait,
Yes.
I gotta press the video thing. Start my video. There we go.
Nice.
Thank you for allowing us to speak. I'm a resident of Kinnickinnick Township at 1207 River Drive, and I was the former chairman of the Planning Commission out there, and served as a county supervisor at St. Croix County and on the road committee. And so I'm an old real estate developer by trade, and I'm speaking in that manner tonight, but I appreciate your public service because I know what it's about. I'll let the Renslows tell you about their land, but we have a contract with them that we've been trying to move forward with the development. And I understand that the city and the staff needed to take their time and review ordinances. And last year was delayed everything. I'm a year behind where I thought I'd be. But we've proposed an alternative plans last January to the Planning Commission. But the main plan that we have focused on was in accordance with the Broadway District Redevelopment Master Plan prepared by Ayers and Associates and presented to the city in October of 2019. And our proposal was either for townhomes or apartments. All of them fit within flat land for the most part, either with this 100-foot setback or a 75-foot setback. But to get any kind of density, we needed to have, a 75-foot setback preferably. And so I want to say that plan that we're presented is consistent with the Maxwell housing study presented to the city, consistent with the Ayers Associate study presented to the city, and that ordinance that you're considering tonight, I think is a one-size-fits-all in urban planning ordinance, and I would urge you to consider on future city council's discretion in urban planning. The site is a very important site, I think, in River Falls' future to avoid building more farmland housing. And I would urge you that this would be in the city's best interest to consider it when approving this ordinance. So thank you for the opportunity of speaking.
Okay, I'm Jim Runslow, and this is my wife, Terry.
Can you hear you?
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
We
Oh,
can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. We had some technical difficulties at the planning commission meeting, so we weren't able to speak at that prior to this meeting, and we did send out a document last night. I don't know if any of you had a chance to read it or look at it, and or had a chance to look at the markings that we had done on the 120 feet, but it's clearly taking a lot of buildable land. But my wife Terry and I have lived in this town for over 35 years and have owned multiple personal residents as well as many rental units, and continue to still do so on a much smaller scale than prior to this. 12 years ago, we did sell the majority of our rental units, but for some reason, we kept on these two parcels because they were on Main Street, they were on the water, and at some point in time, the city had been talking about redeveloping the south side of Main Street and, making things look better, eliminating some of the older housing and stuff like that. So we held on to them. Right about that same time, though, we did have a loss on the 121 Cascade Court property. Unfortunately, it was a fire loss while housing one of the families from the Catholic Church that was homeless at the time. But needless to say, we have not done anything as rebuilding on that. But with this current setback, that house wouldn't even be able to be built on the original footprint. Since then, we've had many discussions and with the city officials on various ideas of future development. We have been very patient during all of this and have been told many different versions of buildable setback options. A lot of you might remember when you were kids. I know when I was going to college, there used to be a trailer that sat on the bottom portion of that lot and the flat portion above the slope. And the city had run electrical and gas to that trailer. So at that time, there was no issue with having any housing on that area. There was also an adjacent barn that I took down after I bought the house because it was falling down. But that was well within the 120-foot setback. They didn't even come and disconnect the gas line until about 5 years ago, which the trailer hadn't sat there for over 15, probably 18 years. So it's about 2 years ago, we decided to tear down 641 because at the time, I was going through some health issues and that, but didn't have the time or energy to get it back up to par to where it should have been. It was more cost effective to tear the house down, which we thought would have to happen at some point in time anyhow. So we cleaned up that entire lot and an area to eliminate the eyesore of many of these old houses have in our community. Having said all this, even 100-foot setback from the DNR studies indicates that there's no additional benefit to the shoreline. So if you stop and look at the markings at the property or had a chance to do so, you'd find out that's clearly the case. Furthermore, just across the South Fork River in the downtown area, the proposed setback is 75 feet with even exceptions to that footage if you put in proper drainage. Now, we understand that putting that protects the old buildings in place and stuff in the downtown area, but even those old buildings have no proper drainage. We also, it's kind of hard to understand why we couldn't be added to that exception being so close to the setback rules as well as located off of Main Street. In conclusion, I guess we're just looking to ask the council to reconsider the alternative setback and preferably back to 75 feet. We have owned several properties and rental properties over the years and have paid many tax dollars to cities which haven't, that has never been an issue for us because we support our community. Now, with this being said, we truly believe that taking the future tax dollars away from the city by enforcing these restrictions on our property would restrict the amount of the building area and eliminate the size of the buildings as well as the number of units that could be built. I guess thanks for letting me speak.
I'd like to say a couple words,
Yes, go ahead.
if I could. I don't, like Jim keeps saying, I don't know if anybody's gone over there or taken a look at the markers or anything, but I'm not good with feet and stuff like that, but by the bridge there, it's literally like 6 feet at the most, I'd say, on the other side of the driveway where the first marker is. And if you go, the driveway's sitting, here, and then you got a little bit of a slope, and then it's all flat from there until the next slope. And we're way up to the slope by the driveway. And that's just, to us, seems it's taken away every place where the trailer sat, the barn sat, and that's perfectly good buildable land that would not ever affect the river in any way, shape, or form, especially if we make sure we have the proper drainage in it and stuff. And I also want to just point out that I have a hard time understanding that on one side of the river, they want to make it 75 feet and even less if drainage is there, but just a half a block away on the other side of the river, they're just making a line down the thing and saying, we just want everybody to be the same, when each, in my opinion, each separate lot that's on the river there has a different slope and it's angled in a different way. To me, it should be more like, or it would be beneficial for, I think, the city and the landowners and the developers to be able to say, if there's a certain amount of slope, then yes, we got to have a further back setback. But if the slope isn't to this extent, then why can't we build out till 75 feet like the state DNR recommendation is, just like you're doing downtown? So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's just hard for us. We come in and we buy a property, it's got buildings down there, and now pretty much we feel like the land is being pretty much taken away from us, when even for the city, we think it's really good buildable land. And if you guys haven't seen it, I'd like you to do so, because it's very, very clear when you look at the markers over there. And again, we're just talking, I don't even know if any of us said, we're talking about 641 South Main and 121 Cascade Court. You guys maybe all know that, but it really slopes back on the Cascade lot, and there are steeper slopes on the Cascade lot, but 641 is pretty much, the whole thing is just level until before the 75 feet.
Well, and
So-
the Cascade lot itself, when the Coast Guard house was there before it burned down, was mowed directly all the way down to the water line. So that's a pretty gradual slope, and it's all graded over there as well. But
So we just want, I mean, we're the property owners. Obviously, we have a big concern about it. And we want the city to get as much use out of this as possible as well. And wanted you to hear our thoughts. And we've been fighting this, or not fighting it, but dealing with it for a long time. A lot of it's because of COVID. But and over the years, council members have changed and stuff. And we've been just told so many different things over the years. So we just wanted you to kind of give you a background on, hopefully everybody remembers the trailer being there and that it was flat land. It is flat land if you go look at it. And again, we'd welcome you to do that. And thanks for letting us comment.
Okay. Thanks, Jim and Terry, and thanks, Gordon. So can you guys stick around in case council, when we get to this on the agenda item, in case council has any questions for you, can you guys stick around for a couple minutes?
sure,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Okay, because that's when they'll ask our other questions from Brandy when after she gives her presentation. So, okay. Okay, so let's move on to, we have a presentation on snow and ice removal. This will be an update from our operations director, Mr. Stifter.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to check with John? I don't believe there's anybody else, but
Oh, I'm sorry about
anybody
that.
else in the council
John,
chambers?
was there, I completely forgot about it. John, was there anybody else? Looking
You're
to-
fine. There weren't other people.
I got caught up in everything else. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, not a problem. Mr. Mayor, thank you, council and staff. I realized, I think it was about 3 years ago when I last presented, and we were recognizing Terry that night, who was getting ready to retire. It was about March, I think 3 years ago. So, and it was just before a big snowstorm. Terry left just in the nick of time that spring. So, but I wanted to take about 10 minutes tonight just to update everyone, answer any questions you might have with this season. So, John, I assume you're seeing the screen okay?
Yes, it looks great.
All right, very good. I added this slide from something we've presented in the past, kind of a then and now. As you know, sand is something we've not used for years. Really, we carry just a very small supply, and only in a real extreme ice storm would we even apply sand these days. Material that we use, and approximately 400 tons in a given year that we use. We do have the capacity of up to 700 tons. But our goal is always to use less and less of it, which then leads us to liquids. Liquids is something we've continued to increase in our systems, not only in the anti-icing operation, which you'll often see prior to a storm, but during the pre-wet operations, as well as even potentially some de-icing now that we'll do after a storm or during to cut through some ice buildup. Calibration is something really in relation to our equipment, both on the material side with liquid as well as the salt itself. We've gotten very aggressive with that in calibrating, which again just keeps the materials that we use in check, not only from a budget standpoint, but also environmental. And then training too. All of our staff at this point are certified other than our newest staff member, and something we look to do in any given year on a variety of different levels, including attending national conferences and then certainly local and regional state ones. And then social media, Mary's addition to the city staff has been very instrumental, and folks like Josie in terms of using social media, in terms of getting information out to city residents. Our winter maintenance goals, I'll go through these just real quick. The sustainability and safe travel through the city is certainly one of our top priorities throughout. Emphasis is always on mechanical removal, so meaning getting trucks out, getting the snow removed. We try to do that at the onset of the snow, hence in combination with chemicals itself, hopefully means less salt and then hence less chlorides in the environment. And then just again, from a budget as well as just staff endurance standpoint, trying to reduce third day operations is always a goal. We work very closely with the police department on evaluating residential parking restrictions, whether it's odd even or one side of the street to another. working with snowbirds or abandoned vehicles, and have a good working relationship with the police with it. Continue to replace equipment. We're very fortunate. We've got a very aggressive capital improvement program, which allows us to keep our equipment in good shape, as well as the staff to that next point, and the innovation, which is constantly evolving. And then again, we try to respond with an optimal amount of equipment, and annually look at the routes, make some tweaks and changes. And as the city continues to grow, we're seeing that north and south, or north and east ends in town, in particular, is where we've seen that again in this last year and anticipate again for next year. And then always planning for future growth, and that's probably reflected more in our CIP in terms of future equipment. The balance, as you know, from public safety to public expectations, and then cutting across that to cost and environmental impacts. Everyone would love to have a level 1 or priority 1 street. We basically have, as you'll note, from level of service to this next slide, priorities: a high, medium, low, and lowest. And our anti-icing route typically reflects the high and medium level streets. The goal is always into that 5th bullet point, 6th bullet point is the plowed road access within 3 blocks of anyone's residence. And again, that's just to try to keep things in check, trying to keep things very safe, very passable. Emergency routes are always our very main priority, but typically when we're going out to treat roads, any of our hills, Gulfview you can think of, past the hospital, going out of town that way, roundabouts both on Cemetery by the school, high school, as well as at the university, are some of the first areas to check, as well as bridge decks, and then just schools, businesses in general, and then throughout kind of main collector streets and arterials through town. Each storm, as you know, is unique. This last storm was probably almost the perfect storm. We'll typically say a 4-inch light fluffy snow, temperatures constant, low wind, temperatures on the back end, very favorable. Temps on the front end, favorable to where it was snow and no rain beforehand. If you remember the snow we had before Christmas, that was almost the perfect storm, but more from Mother Nature's perspective and not ours. You know, a flash freeze, 45 degrees that morning, flash freeze just before it turned over to all snow and 40-mile-an-hour winds, which made it very, very difficult to treat. But this last one worked in our favor. And again, no 2 storms are the same. We're on about our 10th weather event so far this season. This last weekend's, again, was kind of more of the average. We had about 10 inches in that Christmas one, and then a lot of just smaller kind of nuisance storms since. But 9 unique events to date at this point, and about 40 inches of snow to date. Keeping in mind the very first snow occurred in October, one of the largest measurable snows that early in the season. Salt storage and use. I think most of you, if you've been out at the building, are familiar with the building. The bin on the right is the one I mentioned that holds about 700 tons. The one on the left is about 400 tons of material. The one on the left holds more of our treated materials, and then the little bit of sand that we do keep at any one point. Salt, as we'll often talk about, good until you get to about 15 degrees. But then with some additives and other things out there these days, we're able to spike the salt or the salt brine with some other additives that have other salts and other organics in it to make them a little bit more effective. Until about 0, maybe a little bit below, you start getting colder than that, and it gets that much more difficult. Our anti-icing operation, this is just a quick map again, as which we talked about. And again, the significance of this is just to really keep the snow from bonding to the pavement. That Christmas storm was a perfect example of where not being able to get out and anti-ice prior, we dealt with a lot of just ice buildup on the city streets for a few days afterwards. You know, keep in mind too, Christmas Day was a temp of single digits. And it took a few days, if not that next week, really to warm back up and get the pavement to clean off. But this last storm, we had a lot better success with our anti-icing from that standpoint. And really, again, the goal is just to minimize the amount of salt or hard material we have to put down. Crews available. We're fortunate, and we talk about other city staff, is really it's a larger team. We rely on the utility staff, usually up to 2 workers. This year, Dean Seamuth from Water Wastewater runs one of our broom routes, and then typically rely on a couple of the linemen to run kind of our maintenance route in the evenings. And then our full crew will come in overnight with Logan Snyder from one of the linemen that is also one on the base crew, runs our tractor route. I'll occasionally get in and assist. It's almost more for enjoyment from my standpoint, and they'll allow me that. But we'll kind of pick up if in case we have someone on vacation, we're able to kind of back up. And then again, utility staff can assist in that capacity too. Our contracted vendor for years was Burmark. We've started using Cooper Transport. This is our 2nd season with them. They have a nice fleet of trucks, really up to about a dozen trucks in a very large storm. But we typically will use 2, if not 3, and then occasionally we'll use our truck on occasion, which you'll see in the background. And that was last year's photo, as you'll see with Nate still in the photo last year. And then John Linehan, his service provides a lot of assistance both in our downtown area as well as several other key areas. John also does most of our north end these days, both in Whitetail and Sterling Ponds, and provides really a great service, typically a phone call away. And then police, as I mentioned earlier, our customer service staff, Cindy, Wendy, Ellen, take a number of phone calls, work to really diffuse a lot of our situations. Typically before I'm involved, and then Mary and staff to provide a lot of assistance just from an education standpoint. Equipment, again, we're very fortunate to have some great equipment, again, well-maintained equipment. I'd say that those top 5, 6, 7 bullet points are really our base operation. We're able to put a couple of other pickups or the 1-ton into the mix as needed, as well as a couple of our large area mowers that can run brushes, and then a couple of tool cats, which we've purchased just in the last couple of years, if you recall, have become very, very usable. They're great with equipment in terms of their power, their versatility. We don't have to trailer those units. We're able to go down the streets and around town much faster and quicker. And we're able to just use multiple attachments as well as our skid steer, which we can use on occasion. And then, as I mentioned again, our contracted vendor with Hooper Transport. And then this is the final slide really. Outreach efforts this year, of course, was impacted greatly. A couple of these photos here of years past, but our Public Works Awareness Week activity with all of the River Falls second graders, one of the more popular activities. We had done that for 5 years up until this last year. Similar with Leadership River Falls, we had done that with the 8th grade group for the last couple of years. We've been fortunate from a recognition standpoint, the Salt Institute, Freshwater Society from Minnesota, APWA, which is our national organization. Equipment, material, other kinds of things. Our brine maker there is pictured. We were able to purchase that a few years ago. And again, that's what's used to provide our salt brine. And then we work again very closely with the National Weather Service and their Weather Ready Nation initiative, which provides us some information that Mary's oftentimes able to use. And then again, I mentioned our future equipment and routes, depending on growth, we'll kind of follow that. And again, as you know, most of that we're seeing right now is on the east end of town as well as on the north. And so we'll evaluate our routes further, kind of as it pertains to equipment. So, and that is it. I will wrap up there unless there are any questions or comments at this point.
Okay. Can you unshare your?
Yes, let me do that
so
here.
So I can see people if anybody raises their hands.
You bet.
Okay. Anybody got any questions? Yep, go ahead, Mr. Morissette.
Mike, thanks for the presentation. I always enjoy hearing from the operations group. I just want to clarify one thing and then I ask you to talk a little bit more about something else. But you mentioned earlier that there were nuisance storms, just little nuisance storms. Every storm when you get to be my age is a nuisance, just to be clear. So that's number one.
Good point. That is a good point.
The thing I wanted you to talk a little bit about, and I did communicate with Mike earlier this week. I haven't had a lot of people, but I had 2 people kind of mention to me sort of the icy situation on some of the walking paths, specifically around Lake George and the White Pathway. And I know that there's a balance there that you have to find between using the salt that close to the river and trying to keep them clean. And it's a battle because they're dark surfaces. The sun comes out, melts this, and then at night. So could you talk a little bit more about that and how we might be able to do a little more with preventing some of that icy stuff on those paths?
Yeah, that I would say ice not only on that path, but most of our paths right now, as well as just sidewalks. My neighborhood too, a very walkable one up here. You really have to be careful where you're at. And I would say, generally speaking, what happened is our second to last storm. We had a really nice Saturday. The snow had kind of quit, had melted off, and anything you had not gotten off by that late afternoon froze and has not really thawed since. And so now we've got this icy buildup, and really as much from a cost, but the environmental part. We don't treat all of our city streets with salt, much less do we turn around then and start treating trails from that standpoint. And again, as much because of the environmental impact, they're perched right on the edge of the river or get to our waterways or burn the grass off or flowers or trees along the sidewalk edges or trail edges. And so we're really cautious. We did do a little bit of spot treatment last week on the Lake George Trail and a couple of the others. But we really try to limit doing that, for those reasons, because the amount of salt and the true cost with it, but more so I'd say the environmental impact, just given the sensitivity of those areas. And so, that's where especially this time of year now, the patience. If we get some warmer weather this weekend, they're talking some warmer weather, but then the potential for some more sleet, icy snow conditions. So we'll do our part. But really, once it's bonded, because we don't anti-ice again our trails, once it's bonded, it takes now Mother Nature almost to melt it back off unless we come in and get really aggressive with material.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody else have any questions for Mike? No? Okay. So Mike, just a quick question. I know somebody usually asks this every year. Has this been average or above average, below average year for you guys so far?
Well, Scott may have said it best. Every snow is a nuisance when you get to his age. So, but I would say it's been pretty average. We've been fortunate.
Okay.
It was really odd to have that October snow, and as large as it was. We were ready for it, but just barely. Did we have equipment? Actually, we had one of our trucks not quite ready to go. It was being repaired. But I would say since it's been maybe a little bit of a head in terms of where we're at, probably a little bit more snow when you add it all up, but we've had a couple nice melting events that have kind of cleared the slate before we've gotten additional. But if you remember, February of 2 years ago was the snowiest February on record and second snowiest month of all time, second only to that November 1991. So we're maybe not out of the woods, but the long-range forecast, if you put faith in it, would say February, March, April are to trend a little bit warmer or above average. So I'm hoping that bodes well for us. And really, Mother Nature, the sun is pretty intense as you get to February. And you saw that this last Sunday, a 24-degree day, but bright, sunny day. And it really melted the streets off nicely.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Next, move on to, let's see, we got Brandy Howard, city planner, is going to give us a presentation on Ordinance 2021-01, which is amending the Shoreland protection regulations. And Brandy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Perfect.
Hold on. How do I unshare this now? Okay. Whoops. Did you fix it for me, John?
Yes, I pulled it back. Whoop, wait a minute. Hold on. I checked the wrong person.
So I need to reverse the screen that I want to share.
Right. There we go. Now it's back to you.
All right, try that again. Okay. Is it sharing? It's not, is it?
Nope. There you go.
Okay, let's see.
Same screen.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay.
Nice.
Greetings, everybody, Mayor and Council. Thanks for putting up with my technology issues. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through the proposed update to the city shoreline regulations. This is a project that staff and the Plan Commission had been working on for over a year with a bit of a hiatus back when the pandemic began. We picked it up again in the fall, and staff presented a draft to the Plan Commission during a workshop in November. It was then reviewed as an official draft in January by Plan Commission and was recommended for approval at that time. So I'll start with a little bit of background. The existing shoreline regulations were created back in 2003. At that time, At that time, staff and the Plan Commission had grappled with how to create standards that would best protect the Kinney while not being overly restrictive in areas of existing development. So ultimately, the staff developed a variable shoreland buffer that can expand if floodplain, steep slopes, or wetlands are present. So the existing buffer is shown on the screen, and as you can see, in many instances, it can expand to over 400 feet from the ordinary high water mark. So the approach that the city took back in 2003 was quite a bit more restrictive than the DNR standards at the time. And a way to combat that, staff had built in a provision that allows for an exception in the downtown where buildings can be built at the 75-foot mark from the ordinary high water mark if additional stormwater standards are met. So while the existing ordinances worked well, legislative changes make it inconsistent with state law now. Act 80 in 2013 and Act 55 in 2015 reduced the local government's ability to regulate within shorelands. So I'd like to point out two key takeaways on the law change. First, shoreland and shoreland wetland zoning cannot be tied together in a single ordinance. And second, the shoreland regulations in the area of a city that was annexed after 1982 can't be regulated more restrictively than the state's shoreline regulations. So addressing these two factors basically requires a complete repeal and replace of the existing ordinance. The proposed draft separates the shoreland from the shoreline wetland into two unique chapters. And the shoreland chapter creates two new shoreline districts, one that's pre-1982 and one that is post-1982 annexation areas. So I'll talk first about the proposed shoreland wetland ordinance, which will be chapter 17-124. It is intended to regulate land use within the wetlands that are within 300 feet of an ordinary high water mark of a river or stream. Chapter NR 115 of the Administrative Code provides the minimum standards, which are listed, they'll be on the next screen, that must be included in the shoreland wetland ordinance. The DNR created a model ordinance that incorporates those standards, and staff used that DNR as the basis for our model ordinance. And we modified it very little from the model. However, we did tailor the list of permitted uses so they're more applicable to our community. So the rest of the presentation will focus mainly on the shoreline ordinance. So chapter 17-128 is the proposed shoreline ordinance. And like shoreline wetland, the DNR created a model for communities to use when they drafted their code updates. The model includes the 7 minimum statewide standards that are shown on the screen. And our draft generally holds those standards consistent in terms of what the DNR provided in their model between the pre and the post 1982 districts. Where we differ is the building setback and the impervious surface regulations. So this slide I borrowed from the UW extension, but it gives a pretty good graphic demonstration of the ordinance regulations in the post 1982 area. So that part of town that's the newest. So the first thing you'll notice is the 75-foot setback. That is the maximum permitted by the state in the post 1982 areas. Vegetative buffer is also required, which is shown on the screen, and a viewing corridor can be created. Other standards include a maximum building height of 35 feet and lot size requirements default to the base zoning district. So still in the 1982, post-1982 area, we're looking at a slide that I also borrowed from UW Extension. I added the red markings. It depicts an example of the impervious surface requirement. The DNR allows cities to impose an impervious surface coverage limit of 15% within 300 feet of ordinary high water mark. Our proposed ordinance pulls back from that a little bit so that it's only 200 feet. And it's applied only to the main channel streams, the Rocky Branch, Kinney, and the South Fork. It's not applied to the smaller tributaries or dry runs, which will reduce the burden on many properties in areas like Spring Creek Estates. So while it's less restrictive, the approach provides a level of protection that's comparable in scale to our existing ordinance, but it also provides flexibility for garden sheds and the like without requiring a variance. So here's where I'm going to transition to the pre-1982 annexation area. So in general, this area is going to be regulated the same as the post-1982 area, except for the setback and the impervious surface standards. So I want to note here that this is where we can be more restrictive than DNR standards. In our research and discussion with Plan Commission, staff learned 2 key points. The first is for those low-lying lakeshore shorelands that are found throughout the state, we've read that there is diminishing returns beyond 100-foot setback for low-lying areas. And then we also found that for areas with steep slopes, like greater than 25%, that a 120-foot setback is recommended in order to reduce erosion on those sites. So given the existence of many slopes that are greater than 25%, staff proposes the 120-foot setback. We also retain the exception from the existing ordinance that allows buildings in the downtown overlay to build up to 75 feet if the ordinary high water mark, if additional stormwater standards are met. And the additional impervious surface requirement is not included in this area. And that was determined because it's the most significantly built out, and it's an attempt to reduce some non-conforming situations there. So the remainder of the presentation will look at how the proposed ordinance impacts specific areas of the city. So in this map example, you're looking at the northwest corner of Main Street and Quarry Road. These parcels are zoned B3 commercial. The structures on the map are a single family home. That's this one here, a small commercial strip in the middle, and this is the Sard House next to Main Street. So the gray layer shown underneath the blue crosshatch, that's the existing shoreline setback. And you'll notice that 2 of the 3 buildings are currently non-conforming. The proposed conditions are shown in blue. The solid dark blue is the proposed shoreline setback, and the crosshatch is the area where the impervious surface restriction would come into play. So Sam ran some calculations to compare the level of conformity on the site with the proposed conditions. And we found that this site with the house is fully conforming under the proposed conditions. The existing building footprint is just over 1,000 square feet, and it covers just under 15% of the parcel. The northerly site remains non-conforming. It has 34% of the building footprints are within 200 feet of the ordinary high water mark. In this example, this is newer lots in Spring Creek Estates subdivision. And as you can see, there's a few properties that have the existing shoreline buffer extend into their lots, which creates restrictions for them that doesn't allow them to build additions or sheds or decks in some cases. Under the proposed ordinance, the 15% impervious limitation is not imposed on these smaller tributaries or dry runs, so the shoreline setback in this area is a simple 75 feet. So notably, most of these tributaries are throughout the city. Many of them are protected by outlots and are zoned conservancy, and therefore will continue as green space. So this map depicts the single-family homes along Roosevelt Street and the Moose Lodge. That's the large structure on the far right of the screen. The existing 175-foot setback renders most of these structures non-conforming. So many homeowners will find it easier to expand their properties in the proposed ordinance if they wanted to without a variance. So this map shows similar effects for structures along the South Fork. With the existing 175 feet, most parcels along this stretch are not conforming under the proposed. Many of them come into compliance. So this map shows the shoreline setback on North Main Street. The majority of these buildings, they will remain non-conforming under the proposed ordinance, although 2 of the ones closest to Main Street will be conforming. And here we are in the downtown overlay, and the yellow line is where buildings can approach to the 75-foot mark if they apply additional stormwater requirements. The depot and city station project is in the far southwest corner of the map, and that utilized that exception. Owners that can't or opt not to meet the additional stormwater standards, they would have to adhere to the 120-foot setback. So as we mentioned earlier in our research, we found that the steep slopes were frequently cited as a crucial landscape feature that should be protected and maintained to keep river quality high. So this map demonstrates all the steep slopes that are found continuously in the city along the rivers. So those bright red areas, those are the 25% slopes, and the orange is the 15%. Okay, so a note was sent out via email this afternoon about change in the ordinance. So we inadvertently failed to put the most up-to-date draft of the ordinance into the packet. This was mentioned at the Plan Commission meeting back in January. There was a older version of NR 115 that staff had been using to complete our research. We inadvertently used the wrong web link. So in drafting our language related to non-conforming structures, we didn't do it completely correctly. So we wanted to give council the chance to look at the accurate language. So that was sent in the emailed version today. So the changes are basically described on the slide. Essentially, any non-conforming structure can be expanded so long as certain rules are followed. First, the structure must be a principal structure, and it has to be at least 35 feet away from the ordinary high water mark. If they wanted to do a horizontal expansion, the new footprint can't exceed 200 square feet, and it can't be closer to the river than 35 feet. If a vertical expansion is proposed, it has to be limited to 35 feet in height. And structures can be relocated on the site so long as that they're not any closer to the river. So as I mentioned, this was discussed at Plan Commission in January, and it was recommended for approval by them at that time. So in summary, the proposed ordinance will bring many non-conforming structures into compliance, simplify shoreline zoning for homeowners, increase the amount of developable land on presently vacant parcels, and protect the crucial slopes found along the river. So at this point, I will hand it back over to the mayor.
Brandy, and you're sticking around. So if we have questions for you after we look at it on the agenda, then we'll talk to you then.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks. Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda. First thing on the agenda is acknowledgement of the following minutes. We have the library board from 11/2 and 12/7. We have the UAB workshop from 11/17. We have the UAB regular meeting from 11/19. We got the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids Facility Commission meeting from 10:15 and 11:17. We have the Police and Fire Commission from 8:24. We have the Park and Rec Advisory Board from 12:16. We have the Plan Commission from 11:16. We have the River Falls Housing Authority from 10:21, 11:11, and 12:9, and the Bid Board from 12:8. Okay, then, pardon me. Next, we have a resolution approving the city administrator annual performance review process. Next one is a resolution approving the room tax grant. This resolution would authorize a partial reimbursement of the 2020 room tax dollars collected from participating lodging establishments. Reimbursement will come in the form of a $25,000 2020 room tax grant. And the last thing is a resolution approving donation of VMS equipment and supplies. This resolution would authorize staff to donate miscellaneous excess EMS supplies and equipment that are not capital assets to regional non-for-profit agencies, organizations, and educational institutions. Does anybody want to pull anything?
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay. First and second, any questions or comments? Christie, we have first and second on the complete consent agenda.
First by Ms. Odine, a second by Morissette. Start the vote with Mr. Gagne,
Aye.
Plunkett, Bierstead,
Aye.
Morissette,
Aye.
Downing,
Aye.
Odine,
Aye.
Watson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christie. Okay, next we'll move on down to ordinance and resolution. The first one is ordinance 2021-01, amending shoreline protection regulation of the municipal code. And this is the first reading. The second reading and disposition will be on February 9th. And does anyone have any questions for staff or the Renzos if they're still around?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for Randy if she's still there.
I'm here, but oh, there we go.
This may be kind of silly, but on page 13, it says the building may be vertically expanded up to 35 feet. Now, I could read that a couple of different ways, and I know what the intent is, but I don't think we are allowing people to add 35 feet.
Correct. That would be a limit of 35 feet.
Yeah, I wonder if and I'm not into wordsmithing here, but I read it so that, hey, I can add 35 feet to my structure if I want.
Are you referring to the memo or the ordinance itself?
I'm referring to the ordinance itself.
What page did you say that was on?
Well, I'm on 13. And maybe this isn't the time to answer that, but it kind of caught my attention when I read through it.
That is a good point. I'm wondering how it's worded in the.
And I understand the intent. I'm not questioning that, but I as a former developer, I read it that way.
Yep, and I think that if we wanted to wordsmith it, that would be acceptable. I just wanted to take a look at the statute in front of me and see if that was the same wording.
And then a related question, which I'm sure is buried somewhere in all of our documentation, is where's that 35 feet measured from? Because if we have a sloping lot, of course, that can come into question.
The 35 feet, are we talking height now or setback?
Correct, the height.
Let me look and see if there's a definition.
If the lot is sloping, is it in the front of the building or the back of the building? Because I've had those discussions many times too.
We have a building height definition that specifies exactly where in a structure it should be measured from. And I can't, top of my head, tell you if it's the front or the back, but I feel like it's the midline of the roof from around the basis of the building.
Yeah, I was just hoping there was a place we could point to so everybody's clear on that, because I've gone around and around on that before in life too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think we have that one. And if you wanted to make a motion to clarify the wording in that non-conforming situation, I would be amenable to that.
Is that in order, Mr. Mayor?
I think it's an order, but I think we can probably just take direction, since it's a first reading, that everybody understands that the intent here is it's a maximum of 35 feet. I think probably you're talking about 7A Roman numeral 1,
yes.
a little I.
Yep.
Reads may be vertically expanded up to 35 feet, and I understand how you're suggesting that could be read that you could put an additional 35 feet on, but within that same ordinance, I'm trying to find the language. The height is 40, it says in number 4, it says height is 45 feet. So I think I'm understanding from the council that you'd just like us to be able to come back and say, what's the maximum height as it relates? As Brandy indicates, we're suggesting a non-conforming structure wouldn't be able to be taller than 35 feet, even if it would otherwise be.
With an addition, right?
Right. A conforming, I think you could read in here that a conforming property could go up to 45 feet, but not a non-conforming property.
Correct.
So if that's, you could, certainly the council has the ability to provide any direction they want, even detailed to the line item on these, but I think if Brandy's okay with it, I think we understand what the goal here is. We can look at that, cross-reference it to the DNR code and make sure that we think we're in good shape, because we'll have to we're going to probably come up with this great new planning staff we have has come up with a lot of little 1-pager, 2-pager guides that kind of show little maps and drawings to help people, and I think this will probably be one we'll have to come up with.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't mean to make a big deal out of it, but I've dealt with it before, so that's why it caught my eye. So
now this is the time that we'd be interested in that feedback.
Mr. Mayor, you're on mute. I don't know if you're pointing at me or somebody else. You're still on mute. There you go.
I'm sorry. Mr. Plunkett had his hand up earlier.
Sure.
Nope. Still.
Mr.
You're
Plunkett,
muted.
you're on mute. There we go.
oh, we can hear you.
There you go.
What's stump harvesting and prohibited uses?
Oh boy, that's a good question. We talked about that one internally, and basically it's if I recall correctly, the pulling out of the stump after you cut down the tree.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay, Mr. Morissette?
Oh, can I add to that?
Yep, go ahead.
Crystal just gave me a chat that has the actual answer. Stump harvesting is disturbing to the ground, and that's why we don't want that to occur.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Morissette.
You know, as I read the ordinance, I read the packet, and I actually attended the plan commission meeting, and you know they did good work at the meeting of really going over this, and this is an important ordinance for the city. There's a couple things that struck me. I struggle with the 100 versus the 120. I realize staff is recommending the 120, but when the DNR is sort of saying you don't really gain that much, you know, I think I could be talked into maybe looking at a 100-foot setback. The other thing I think that I would like us to consider or have some discussion about is the 75-foot setback with stormwater. If we look at it in the downtown core, and you know, I think we all think of the downtown Main Street specifically right next to the Kinney, but there's a lot of other places that the setback, you know, some of the setback stuff, you know, comes into play. That's in that corridor. I'd almost like to see us consider putting that 75-foot with stormwater management across the whole city. To be honest with you, if there's a project, I think stormwater management is more valuable than a setback. And I'd like to see if we can't find a way to entice any project in town to do stormwater management rather than just live with the setback. I think it's an option that we should kind of consider. I was trying to find, and I should have contacted staff, but I was trying to find where the Aldi project came in, and I know that Aldi did a pretty extensive stormwater underground, but I think that's an example of kind of what I'm talking about. We got stormwater management in that project, which admittedly would highly impact that section of the Kinney. Ultimately, I think stormwater management is a better answer if we can get it in a project than a setback. So I guess my thought is I'd be willing to consider bringing it from 120 back to 100 and outside the downtown core, giving them an option of 75 feet if they put in stormwater management, so that there's some a big enough difference that it almost would entice them to consider that stormwater management. Because I think we all, we're all looking at this ordinance. We all want to do what's right for the Kinney. And in my mind, I think stormwater management is a great answer versus just setback. So with that, I'll open it up to others.
Mr. Mayor.
Downing had his hand up first.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for our city attorney. I was curious about the language that we're using in this, and if there's anything that you might be concerned about. And is it possible that stormwater management could be considered in the language potentially in the future if we were to adopt something like that regarding to how we look at it?
Go ahead, Mr. Gerhardt.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah, I've looked through the ordinance. I don't have any particular concerns with the language used. Most of these ordinances are essentially model ordinances that are, promulgated by the DNR and adopted for the most part by municipalities in the state as written, because the DNR for the most part has stated what the standards are going to be. That said, I'm not opposed to exploring the possibility of implementing stormwater management provisions that are more restrictive than DNR provisions if we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Gagne, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I definitely second what Mr. Morissette had to say. I would really hate to be overly restrictive on our builders or developers, our property owners in the city. Definitely want to take advantage of, bringing things close to the water, but not in a fashion that are going to impact our Kinney or the South Fork in a negative manner. I think Mr. Morissette brings up a valid alternative, and I would be supportive of everything that he had to say.
Something to say? Yep, Mr. Watson.
Thanks. I do want to thank, and I will again when this comes up for second reading, but the city staff really did a great job on this ordinance, and also just remind people that this ordinance is a major pullback from where we were before in terms of allowing uses to be closer to the river. So, and I was on can't remember if it was the Plan Commission or the City Council when we did the first ordinance. But from my perspective, we are allowing a lot more to happen closer to the river with this ordinance than we originally set out to do, even 10, 12, 15 years ago. So I just want that perspective to be in your minds, because I think this is a big, already a big accommodation to landowners and developers and others who part of the goal that Brandy didn't mention, but that Amy had brought up in the Plan Commission, it was that the existing, and it relates to some of the comments that were made during public comment. The existing ordinance has this variable setback where, depending on the slope and some other factors, you may be, you and your neighbor might have a different setback or so forth. And they've had a really hard time. It's very confusing, for people to understand, well, what is my setback? And it's kind of calculated on the map, and it's hard to reverse engineer that in a way that makes sense to everybody. So There were there was a comment that was made, you know, this is a one size fit all. And honestly, it is a little bit of a one size fit all when you comes to the setback, but that was not a sacrifice, but that was an accommodation for simplicity in being able to explain the ordinance and being able to enforce the ordinance and so on. And so I think they did a good job. You know, I was not honestly in favor of this ordinance or changing the ordinance at all really, but I think that, you know, well, the law had changed, and obviously we had to redo this. I did go down to the Renslow's property, and I did take a look at the markings that were put up, and I encourage everybody else to do that too. To my mind, the setback that's marked on that property is perfectly appropriate for that section of the river, and I don't have a problem with it. So I'm not in favor of making any major changes to the ordinance as it has been presented. Thank you.
Yep, Mr. Plunkett.
Can I ask Mr. Watson to expand further on the thoughts as to why they originally had that larger setback, and what are the benefits of that?
Well, the main issue is the slopes, and then also kind of an ancillary issue is really the view shed from the river itself. And then finally, the third thing, which we also did discuss in the Plan Commission, was that this buffer around the river, the river itself, not just the Kinney, but all of the tributaries, including the South Fork. And let me remind you that we're removing a lot of the regulation from all the third order streams. So now it's just the Kinney, the South Fork, and the Rocky Branch, whereas before we included, there was probably another dozen smaller, you know, tributaries that were also included in this ordinance. But anyway, if you look at an aerial photograph, what you realize is that these river corridors are really the migration and the green arteries, essentially, of our city. And so you've got a lot of wildlife, a lot of birds, and moving through these areas. And this is how that wildlife makes its way from the north end of town to the south end of town, from east to west, and they follow the water. Because, you know, that's their one of their life-giving sources, but, you know, they need this cover as well. So, you know, to my mind, it makes sense in that way, in addition. Thanks.
Okay. Yep, Mr. Plunkett, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, this one then is for staff, I guess. If we do remove those protections from some of those tributaries, would we have problems if we tried to add those back in the future if they were found to be necessary for various reasons?
Add the restrictions back into place? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so Mr. Watson had mentioned, and you had brought up also that many of the tributaries was just the three main branches we were covering here. If it was found to be necessary for reasons to have those other areas covered by this ordinance in the future, would it be a simple matter of adding it back in, or would we then be looking at some sort of grandfathering of issues regarding putting in shoreline restrictions on these other areas?
Well, the restriction that is missing now is whether we'll limit impervious surfaces to 15% from 0 to 200 feet total. So if we were to change that to something more restrictive or less restrictive, assuming this were to be passed in some form, then it would either probably have to, just come back to you for another ordinance amendment under the same process, or alternatively, we would continue to encourage through the subdivision process the dedication of those types of lands to become conservancy areas, which many of them already are. Sam would like to say something.
Yeah, so on those smaller tributaries, we're not removing protections. They still have the 75-foot setback. It just doesn't have that impervious surface 200-foot buffer that the main channels do. And in our existing ordinance, the minimum width for those tributaries is also 75 feet. It does come back a bit where there's no slopes because we're not doing that addition for the slopes, but there is still a 75-foot setback on all of the tributaries.
Thank you if I misspoke, Sam. I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, anybody else have anything on this? I just want to mention that I have made some of the same, not arguments, but some of the same comments that Mr. Morissette had made about the 100 feet and the 75 feet. If people are willing to put time and money into stormwater, we can't go wrong with that. If they want to go 75 feet, we can do it downtown in the overlay district. We should be able to do it everywhere in town. But we have 2 weeks to look at this. The council has 2 weeks. I think everybody should do some studying and look at it, get out, look at some areas, and really think about it. So let's move on if nobody else has got anything.
Mr. Mayor,
Yep.
I think Sam might have had a comment about the 75-foot stormwater and applicability across the city.
Yep.
Sam.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that stormwater is feasible outside of, or the post-1982, just because of what state statute allows. Right. Those 7 provisions that are in the memo and the ordinance, the state says you cannot be stricter than that. And in discussions with them, we talked about slopes or bluffs or different things tied to the ordinance. And they said, basically, anytime you tie something to a distance from the river, it's shoreland zoning. So if you're adding something like stormwater that's not in the shoreland zoning to the post-1982, it would be becoming more strict than the state standard, which they're currently not allowing based on that most recent law change.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. We appreciate that.
So Sam, Sam or Brandy, I guess, because it sounds like there's something here for the council that I want to try to understand before we come back in 2 weeks. But so I think what Sam is saying, or to summarize, there may be some pre-1982 properties for which you could apply kind of stormwater bonus, for lack of better phrasing, which we have included in the downtown, which is all entirely, as far as I know, entirely in the pre-82. But if the council is only interested in reducing the setback, if enough of you are interested in reducing the setback number to 75 with stormwater, understand that currently staff doesn't believe you could do that unilaterally across the city. You would be, at best, you'd be limited to the pre-1982 areas of town, which may in fact address some of the concerns that certain property owners have in the city, but the post-82, the DNR is frankly trying to have cities avoid adding kind of restrictions that get them to a more restrictive setback without actually just moving the setback. So keep that in mind as you deliberate and think about direction you may give the council. Our staff is intending to keep essentially this draft, because it's the recommended draft from the Plan Commission and it's supported by staff. This would be, therefore it is supported by staff because that's what the Plan Commission is recommended to you, council members. That would be what would be coming back for a second reading. Attorney Gerhardt could correct me if I need correction, but you do have the ability to do quite a bit of modification to the ordinance. So if you so choose, you obviously have the ability to just pass it as it's recommended. And then there's other options, including sending it back to staff, sending it back to the Plan Commission. So you have some options for the council to feel like they've gotten to the right ordinance for the community. So that's how I see this playing out over the next couple weeks. Staff would be hesitant to draft up 7 or 8 or 9 different alternatives. We'll stick with unless we were provided direction from the mayor, we would stick with the ordinance as presented, understanding that we have to be prepared as staff to discuss some of the types of modifications that council members have talked about, but ultimately we'll have to do that somewhat working with you at a future meeting if you wanted to modify. Obviously, changing a number in an ordinance isn't that difficult to understand what you're doing and get emotion in that, but we'll probably limit our investigation as staff to this idea of the stormwater enhancement type thing for the pre-1982, although understand staff has already looked at that and isn't recommending it. Ultimately, it's the council's decision.
Okay.
So just to clarify,
Oh,
Scott, if I could. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor. I
No.
jumped in.
Yep, I was gonna call on Todd. Hang on one second.
Okay, go ahead.
Todd had his hand up.
I was just going to ask, if we don't resolve all of this in 2 weeks, is there any time pressure on this decision? I mean, we're not up against some sort of a deadline, are we?
No, I mean, we can't enforce an ordinance that's no longer supported by statutes, which means that while we don't have an ordinance, anything that's contrary to state statutes or DNR administrative code, we have to interpret as staff kind of on a case by case basis in the meantime. So that's the main urgency, I suspect, to get something resolved is absent having a clean slate and a new ordinance that we know is consistent with state law. We have to work with developers who may, say, well, this provision of your current ordinance is not enforceable, and then so we got to do it. So that's the only urgency. But
okay,
as far as did we do a first reading and now we have to act within so many days, that's, to my knowledge, there's no requirement of that. It's when the council's prepared to approve it, they can approve it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Morissette.
So Scott, if I could just simplify in my mind, what I think I heard you say is we could potentially put in place a 75-foot setback with stormwater management inside the pre-1982 boundary, but we can't put it in place outside the 82 boundary. Is that a fair statement?
Most definitively, we cannot put it in the post-1982. The pre-1982 is a strong possibility, but I would still want to take some time that would be something staff has kind of kicked around a little bit. So we think you can do what you want in the pre-1982 within some parameters, but the post-1982, I don't think it would work or be
Could
enforceable.
I ask staff to look at that and get back to us?
Yeah, I mean, or we could even talk about it this evening, probably, if you wanted to a little bit. Was that Crystal or Sam what you wanted to speak to?
I was going to say, oh, I didn't know Crystal was here. I was going to say Crystal had a good explanation at the Plan Commission meeting if anyone wants to watch it, but it sounds like we got the real deal, so.
I'll try to recreate. I just want to make a point of clarification on this extra stormwater. It's important to note that in the downtown and outside of the downtown, everyone has to do stormwater, no matter what. If you want to move your building closer than the setback within that downtown, you can go up to 75 feet with additional stormwater measures. Now, the additional stormwater measures are based on infiltration, which is for small runoff events. So those storms that are under 1.5 inches of rainfall. What it doesn't protect against is scour and erosion on those slopes in bigger storm events. So I just wanted to clarify that.
New questions with this stuff? No? Okay. Thank you. So let's move on to ordinance 2021-02, creating chapter 17.117 for breweries, brewpubs, wineries, and distilleries. And there again, this is the first reading, and the second reading will be on February 9th. Questions for staff on this? Yep, go ahead, Mr. Plunkett.
Mr. Mayor, do we have a definition, barrel size for micro distillery and nano brewery?
Amy, you got that one?
Sure. So staff, when they were drafting this ordinance, took a look very closely at all of the definitions, and you can really go to town on these and get a fairly complicated ordinance if you want to define all of those definitions by gallons or barrels, etc. So while the state statute states that the brew pub is by barrels, I believe, we decided not to include that in the other definitions because, say, a nano brewery or a micro distillery could be, you know, a couple quart jars or a couple gallons that somebody's just doing out of a closet in a restaurant as a side business. So that's why those aren't included in those definitions.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Gagne.
So this is not in any way impacting the homeowner that is doing their own brew, potentially on a little bit larger scale. This wouldn't impact them by any means, right? This is more on the commercial scale?
Correct. Yes.
Woo!
500 gallons per year or something, Chris?
Probably not even close.
Remember that figure from somewhere.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Plunkett.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. As we're looking at distilleries and even a brew pub with a 10,000 barrel capacity, I wonder, I mean, that's actually a fairly large quantity of brewing going on. And I wonder about that in our B1 and B2 districts, as well as the traditional neighborhood districts. I mean, a 10,000 barrel capacity, that's, what are we at here? 30 barrels a day coming out, if I did my math right here. Yeah, each and every day, which is sort of a lot of distilling, I guess, or brewing for a traditional neighborhood. And then as we look at distilleries, I wonder with our B1 and B2 districts, if this isn't in some ways conflicting with the intent of those districts as being much more appropriate for a manufacturing, particularly as we're looking at something that could be having 10 or 100,000 gallons of high proof alcohol on site, and the risk that could present to neighboring structures in the downtown areas with, 190 proof grain alcohol.
So I will say a couple things, I guess, related to the brew pub. So if I remember correctly, I believe both Swinging Bridge and the Garage Bikes and Brews have a brew pub license, and they operate in the B1. To that point, I think some of the infrastructure that we have in the downtown, the buildings, et cetera, would limit necessarily the larger capacity that even the brew pub definition would allow. So I think you had a question regarding distilleries as well. Would you be able to repeat that?
You. And, you know, as we look at Swinging Bridge, at least, I think they have, you know, maybe a couple barrel at a time capacity. I'm not real sure. Something that I would certainly consider Nano, and probably the Bikes and Brews too. On the distilleries, we're allowing that in the general commercial B1 district, which looks to be most of downtown, that area there. And I'm just wondering about potential issues that we'd have with highly volatile, flammable liquids in quantity in that area. If there were some sort of issue that wouldn't necessarily be where I'd want to have it.
Sure, something to consider. I do know that in the building process for distilleries, there's architectural standards by state code that are required because of those flammable type materials. I think that staff included it in the B1 district because there's potential, well, in fact, we were considering at one point a brew pub that could move into the backside of Family Fresh before Fairview took it over. So there was, you know, space at one time for that kind of operation. I think that's what was probably the consideration at this point. So.
And I guess that goes back to those micro distillery and nano brewery definitions. I think that up to a certain size, these would fit in with the character of those zoning districts. But outside of that, it really becomes something more appropriate for the light industrial or highway commercial districts, as I view our zoning and the intent of that.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Watson.
Just something that one of the issues you touched on, Mr. Plunkett, that came up in the Plan Commission was the fact that the traditional neighborhood district, even though its name sounds like a neighborhood R1 residential, what that actually is indicating is kind of a mixed use neighborhood where you have, and you probably already know this, but I just want to make sure the folks at home understand. It isn't like you're going to have a brew pub right next to, you know, in between two houses. You've got a traditional neighborhood district has kind of a core with some light retail, dry cleaners, potential brew pub, you know, daycare, that type of thing, surrounded by the housing and so forth, higher density housing closer to it and a little further away. So there's a design around traditional neighborhoods that the name of it doesn't necessarily conjure up what it actually is when you look at the code. Thank you.
So, if I may follow up.
Yeah.
Like the houses in Sterling Ponds couldn't be converted to a brew pub under conforming use.
I'll leave that to Amy. I don't know the answer to that. There was in the platting or in the neighborhood design for Sterling Ponds, there is a zone that is the kind of the commercial zone of the traditional neighborhood in the PUD. That some of that has changed over time, so I don't want to speak out of turn completely because it's been many years in there, and I know that the concept for Sterling Ponds has changed. So and I may not be right on target to answer that.
Yeah, so I think along the lines of a Hal's comment, staff would take a look at the planning for Sterling Ponds. We are at this time as to where the commercial lands, and have not included the options for commercial within the residential component of the district. Those are considered residential at this time and would not be modified to commercial, I don't believe so.
There's essentially within the TND, as I'm looking at the official zoning map, even though that's all in that purple color, there are different subsets of that I'm not seeing on the zoning map.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions on this? No? Okay. We'll move on to the administrator's report. Scott, whatever you have for us, and if anybody has any questions for Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. You've got a pretty slim administrator's report. I've provided some updates on different things going on in the community. I do want to let the council know that we have come to an arrangement, partnership with UWRF and the federal government to continue the surge COVID testing. There were some challenges in continuing that at the location at the university. The university approached us about trying to find a way to partner. They were presented some resources through the university system. I'm not sure that, we don't know at this time how many of the campuses are going to choose to take them up on it, but we raised our hand. So Assistant City Administrator Stroud has been working with university, and we expect to get that site up and going in the next few days here. It'll be Tuesdays and Thursdays at Hoffman Park Storm Shelter. And the city will be utilizing some of its CARES Act funding, a small amount. We've contracted with an able kind of person to manage the logistics going on there. All the staffing for the testing itself is all provided through the federal government, as it was at the UW Center. So I see Assistant Administrator Stroud's on the phone. Maybe he wants to elaborate on that, but I wanted to raise that point to the council and let you know we've been able to work that out. So, Jason?
Oh, yes, sir. I just wanted to clarify that the intention is to hold the test site on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., Wednesdays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Our intention is to begin this next Tuesday, so long as we can have all the logistics in place in time. However, we're working hard to make that happen, and I don't see any issues with being able to start next Tuesday.
I'll give some people practice at the new entrance to Hoffman Park. I know people have been getting that practice with the sledding hill, but it's good to get more people in the community to understand kind of how to turn into Hoffman Park now, and we'll have to work through the logistics there. But I really appreciate the quick work of our team to kind of take that opportunity. I had a brief chance to talk to the mayor, and he said, it sounded like a good opportunity to him, and so we were able to try to make that happen in a short period of time. I think that'll be a continuing resource for the community. The healthcare providers in the area have really ramped up their capacity for testing now, so that's really improved from when the surge testing was originally put in place. But there was still something on the order of 600 plus people using that every week. So at least with the 2 days, we'll be able to cover a fair amount of that capacity going forward, and that's through April. So appreciate the federal government's resources, the university system, the university, this local campus really should get a lot of credit too, they did a lot of work with really no credit. They resourced a lot of their staff to get that surge testing site up and running and operating well, and big service to the community at large. So we're happy to try to continue to do our part to keep that going. City Hall is also open to walk-in traffic Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It still remains open to appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we're continuing to ramp up all of our other offerings for customer service, give lots of people options where they don't need to come to City Hall to get their business taken care of, and that's been I'd say very well received by the public. In fact, I think it's a preference of a number of members of the public to kind of they just as soon be able to conduct their business with us without coming to City Hall. So we're happy to be able to do that. And I think you'll be getting some good results with the comptroller's report here upcoming. And we're happy to say that we were kind of successful in making a good plan in March of 2020 to make sure we were prepared for any financial contingencies related to the pandemic. That played out pretty well over the course of the year in a financial way. Certainly provided some stress on our system, so to speak, for staff, but they really did a great job of kind of dealing with the vacancies and shifting all of our resources to support the community. So be happy to take any questions you might have on other things of interest.
Anybody have anything for Scott? Yep, Mr. Plunkett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we talk about the COVID case there, we've got a couple of variants that are of concern. B117 and B11248, that other one. Yeah, the B11248 variant. We're starting to see that some of the tools that we had been using with some of these variants are not as effective as they have been. And I am hearing recommendations and some policy from the federal, the current administration, as well as other areas, other nations, and some public health stuff regarding improving the efficacy of what we're using for masks. Is there any way that we can be looking at us as a city at ensuring that our residents have the proper safety equipment available for them? Things like N95 masks and some other things.
I think the short answer is there is a way for us to look into those things. We're not sure at this point that we are the practical solution provider to that, given supply chain issues at the federal level with some of those items that need to be worked out. So we're not actively trying to request that kind of PPE for the public in general. We certainly are monitoring it for our frontline staff, less or so now that we don't have the EMS to worry about as far as PPE. That's something that Line is doing. So to your question, can we do it? Certainly. I mean, the city council could ask us or direct us to kind of come up with additional plans locally for that, but we're continuing to rely on the state and county, and increasingly the counties are working on a regional basis with multiple counties trying to come up with some solutions for some of this, some of those issues as they arrive. We don't have a solution locally that we've developed, nor are we actively working on it. So I wouldn't pretend to be the expert, but at this point, Councilmember Plunkett, I'm not sure the city's the best equipped to try to deal with that. In essence, we are waiting to see kind of how the county and state and federal government ultimately provides direction for what resources are available. Right now, we're not able to source much of anything from a public health perspective for our residents directly. You see cities like Milwaukee and Madison trying to do that and not having much success at this point. So we're kind of watching that. I have participated in calls with mayors and managers across the state of Wisconsin. There is a general call at this point from like the mayors, U.S. Conference of Mayors, and to a lesser extent the National League of Cities, that if there's kind of a new strategy put in place by the federal government, cities are well equipped in their mind to directly provide these services you're talking about. But right now, that's not the way. Right now, cities aren't kind of in line to get it from the feds. It goes to the state, and then the state has determined partners other than the cities, generally speaking. Although in the case of the testing, you've seen when we see an opportunity that we can play a role, we kind of jump at it. And we've made that known to our partners at the state and the county level that River Falls is willing to be a little more proactive. If there is a role for us to play, we'll consider playing that role should the council support it. So right now they haven't. Specifically to vaccines, so I talked about PPE, but specifically to the vaccine and our role as a local government in that, we haven't found our way into that discussion yet. We've asked several times, is there something the city can or should be doing to assist our residents with vaccinations? And pretty consistently, we've been told, not really, just stay out of our way. So we're in a good position, I think, in River Falls that we have a number of kind of authorized vaccinators and people that are able to get source a vaccine directly from the state. So that's helpful because I think vaccines will be a little more plentiful, relatively speaking, in River Falls than some other areas outside of River Falls in the immediate vicinity. But the overall vaccine is still only 70,000 vials a week. So does that answer your question? I think I talked about PPE, vaccines, and other general help for the public. Right now, cities have not been put in a position to be that helpful.
You covered it. My understanding was that we don't have a supply chain this time that is accessible to the city, but that were that to exist, it would be something that potentially happens to significantly increase the safety for our residents.
Right. Right now, we've been having difficulty. I would say right now we don't see a way to get N95s even for all of our poll workers. So, right now we're able to get surgical masks and other PPE, but I think we're a long ways away from being able to get general supplies, but we are keeping an eye on it.
Okay. Anybody else have anything for Scott? Yep, go ahead, Mr. Watson.
I want to thank Scott, our Administrator Simpson, and staff for this testing effort, continuing on this testing effort. To be able to go in and get a test without cost on relatively short notice and get an answer back within an hour or so or less. I've already myself gone, down to the university 3 times because I was in contact with someone who tested positive, and I didn't know what my situation was. Am I wearing a mask in my house so I'm not getting other members of my household sick? Can I, how much can I go to whether I can go to work? Just all these questions that suddenly pop up when you realize that you've been in contact with someone who did test positive. And to be able for City of River Falls residents to go down and get a test and get an answer, and it's just such a game changer, for how we live our lives, and so I'm really grateful that you jumped on that, Administrator Simpson, and then that we're following up on that. So thank you, and the university deserves a ton of credit No doubt about it.
Mr. Mayor.
Yep, go ahead.
And I'd say too, I've been into Alina a couple times and had tests, and they're testing on site and having those back next day. And they've been doing a phenomenal job there as well.
Anybody else? Okay, so we'll move on to the comptroller's report with Ms. O'Dean.
Yes. Sure was one of the highlights of the evening. This is the comptroller's report for December 2020. Preliminary year-end general fund revenues were $11,137,419, with expenditures of $9,790,949, resulting in a net surplus of $1,346,470. Some of the excess funds will be used to pay down a portion of the city's outstanding debt. But please know that the 2020 accounting period is still open and year-end adjusting entries are still being made. Additional revenues and expenses will be allocated to 2020 as final invoices and expenses are received and recorded. And so these numbers are preliminary, subject to change prior to the close of the accounting period. But this is good news considering the belt tightening that we've done this year. It's worked.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Ms. O'Dean. Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Christie, we have first and second to adjourn.
First by Bierstadt, second by Downing. Let's start the vote with Mr. Morset.
Aye.
Watson.
Aye.
Plunkett. Gagne.
Aye.
O'Dean.
Aye.
Aye.
Downing.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Christie. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, staff, for everything. Everybody take care and be safe.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.